So as we go into the penultimate video of this series, I should probably mention that early, going back to the beginning when I said that I was going to do, when I go through everything, it was going to be to talk about pretty much the entire movie, just also Blunt's performance in the middle of it. Um, Kind of dissimilar to what I've done with other actors in the past, but here I feel like it's probably going to be maybe 10% me talking about the movie, 90% talking about what she does in it, because this is yet another one of those cases where I guess she's technically not the main character if you consider Mona to be, but she might as well be, and she's definitely the one that you walk away from the movie constantly thinking about and still dissecting, even with the movie being 14 years old now. So released about 13 years ago, but it's like technically 2004, I think. And though it does come from a director that is now quite celebrated, Pavel Pawlikowski. I really hope I said that right. And it's he is the director of like Ada, and this year he's got Cold War like in a lot of awards consideration. Um, and yeah, there is obviously, a lot to like about it, whether it be, the way it's shot or the way it approaches its subject matter and all that. It's to my understanding that it's like slowly getting this reputation of being like iconic in the lesbian community or whatever, which makes sense. And it does sort of like set up, like judging by the title and just hearing the setup, it basically kind of promises it's going to be this sort of basic coming of age movie that blossoms into a lesbian relationship or whatever. Uh, the most interesting thing about this is not exactly. Even if you were to watch it just on the surface, you could probably still take that away from it. But much like the character that Blunt plays, it's got some very interesting things under its surface, despite what it looks like at first. Um, so when it starts off, we do start off with the Mona character just in this sort of. There's been an apparent tragedy where now it's just her and Patty Considine living in this pub together, or above this pub, I guess. And they're in two totally different places. She's off having this sort of. I want to say promiscuous, but it's one dude, so it's almost like she wants to be promiscuous, but she's not there. Whereas he's just gotten out of prison and found Jesus and God and all that, and is going through this whole project of building this giant cross to put on a hill. So they could not be in more different places, and that certainly brings them even farther apart when she runs into Tamsin, or should I say Tamsin runs into her. Where she basically comes in and it's like this sort of almost fairy tale entrance where she's like on horseback and just sort of comes into her life just at the most abrupt time, yet in the most kind of susceptible too. Um, and the whole kind of setup here is pretty obvious from the get-go, just in this first meeting alone, where much like I was saying, her and her brother couldn't be in more different places. Her and Tamsin really couldn't be either, where Tamsin's obviously coming from this really rich background. She's almost too educated for her own good. And Mona's kind of got this bit more of like a country background, and she's really naive, and her grammar is awful. But there's still this connection here that just sort of happens almost instantaneously, which probably has a lot to do with the fact that the interesting setting here, where it's like apart from Patty Considine and the people who like are part of his church thing or whatever you want to call it, there is so rarely a person seemingly around at all. Let alone people like them, like two young teenagers that are finding themselves and life or whatever. So it just kind of happens in a way that is inevitable yet like kind of believable also, in regards to not just feeling like it's a story that has to happen, so these things happen that you might see elsewhere. So and of course, Tamsin's gonna be one of those characters where not only is she, when I say a little too educated for her own good, I mean somebody that's gonna kind of constantly try to let it be known just how educated they are. Like when Mona introduces herself and she says the whole "some people called me Lisa" thing, and the joke is Mona, Lisa, and get it. And instead of Tamsin like saying, "Yep, got it. Her response is, I've studied the original, without really being prompted to even go in that direction. But, and then you can also see the difference between them and where they're coming from when Muna seems to try to do like a similar kind of thing where she's playing the piece on the cello and she says that it's the Swan, and Muna's response to this is, "Oh, the Swan is the name of the pub that I live in," and it like immediately backfires on her because instead of being in awe of this, go figure, Tanner's response is simply, "You live in a pub." That's weird. um, and so just all these things immediately that show you these differences, but there is, interestingly enough, like still an instant connection that you can actually see. Like the movie does not have to like push this on you. Like you can see it plain as day from the very start. Especially the scene when she first walks in and she sees her playing the cello, and there's that sort of like a silent connection between them, and we do get to see like it just kind of adds to the sophistication of Tamsin. Also, it's also doubly nice since it's actually blunt playing and all that. But there is something here where we do see like a sort of self-discipline and a precision in Tamsin that's like really right there in this one moment where we see Mona walk in, and it's like how she's playing this piece but she like never breaks even when she's distracted seeing Mona in the room. Like there's no sort of misstep or anything, and it just sort of shows that. But it also kind of shows you when you know what's going on, that self-discipline and precision goes into more than one talent than just playing the cello that she has, and we'll realize just how good she is at something else later. Kind of feels like some big clue to that when you already know what's going on. But like I said, for the most part, it does like to play up that, like maybe she's, I don't know if it's taking advantage of knowing just how naive Mona is or really comes off. But when you get dialogue, like when they're in like the garden and she's talking about like Nietzsche and Freud and Wagner, and it's like, it's one of those clear cases of it seems like somebody that's just wants to show they're educated, so they're just name dropping the most obvious possible names that scream "I'm educated." So I kind of really like that they put that in her dialogue to kind of show that off, but also dialogue wise, there's a lot of stuff like there could be stuff like that, but then there's also when they do kind of go in that sort of coming of age feel, where in the usually the better movies like this, you'll notice that a common trend is how straightforward the dialogue is, particularly in the sexual nature that things are going. Like when Tamsin just flat out asks stuff like, "Do you fuck a lot?" is how she actually words it. So even if it does feel like it's more than that kind of movie, still when it has those elements of it, it is nice that they're able to find that feel, even if they have a lot more to say about it than just that, what we're used to. And so when it comes to that also, I would say it feels quick that their relationship blossoms, but I think that mainly has to do with how short the movie is. The movie doesn't even break an hour and a half. So it's probably about halfway through when the relationship kind of reaches its physical peak. But the really interesting thing about the physicality of the relationship is how it's the way that it's built up throughout really gives it this like real feel to it, where it's and it's not like overbearing in how much it's like it's not trying to be like this you know sensual sort of thing about. I mean, obviously that's going to be there, of course. But when I say the way they gradually build to it in a more realistic sense, it's the way that they don't talk about it while it's happening, like, at all. Because you got the, very casual things, like when Tamsin starts holding her hand around the house and stuff like that. And then that goes into them sharing a bed. But once again, there's really nothing to this. Nothing happens. They're on opposite sides. They're not even thinking about it, really. And then eventually this leads to Tamsin kissing her when they're by the waterfall. And once it happens, but they barely seem to react to it, and they never talk about it. But then in like a scene or two later, we get the moment when they're in like the tall grass, and Tamsin just lays back and disappears in it, and then shortly afterward, Mona does the same, and then they just don't come back up. In the way that they portray it like that, before it finally does get I guess fiery is a word. The reason I use the word fiery, though, I think, is the actual shot where we see their silhouettes like making out in front of a campfire. So it's like literally and figuratively, that's where they eventually reach. And they get into things like the dialogue I was talking about, like when this results in Tamsin saying, "If you leave me, I'll kill you," and then Mona saying something as drastic as, "If you know I leave you, I'll kill myself," or something. And it's like, and it's actually like this perfect portrayal of, to where like in one sense, if you're looking at it at surface level, you could say it's a really romantic movie and all that, and it's like this is a big romantic love between the two of them. But obviously, if you've sort of moved past that, and if you've seen the movie multiple times, you'll realize that it's less that and more like, number one, it's definitely much more of like a temporary lust thing, but also that what they're saying to each other and what they're doing is what teenagers view as like an undying love, as opposed to something a bit more like realistic as this goes on. And it's blatantly clear to us that these aren't exactly two people that are going to like grow old and die together by any means, or if anything else, as the title tells us, may not even last after this season, let alone any further than that. So I do like the sort of self-awareness that it has there also, but like I said, can be seen multiple ways if you're seeing it for the first time versus how you get a clearer grasp on it the more you either think about it or see it, or both. Um, and so, going on more about what exactly Blunt is doing here is, like I said, I guess technically Mona's the main character, but I mean, all you can fucking think about after this movie's over, and during it really, is Tamsin's character, especially even small glimpses of things, like when she's looking through the window and we're watching her have dinner with her family, and there's this very clear distance where like everybody's occupied by something and she's just sort of staring ahead and she's not even eating, she just pushes the plate away, and it's like there's, once again, once you know the character, at least we never know this character, but know her as well as we're going to, we get this sense of she's either this is either something that makes her really easy to pity and we feel for her because she's feels so distant from her family, or this is a girl that's just bored with her life and will do just about anything to make herself not bored. Whether that's at the expense of people's emotions doesn't matter. But the thing also is, when we talk about that there is, other layers underneath her that she seems to, like, slowly be peeking out but are more or less hiding. You can obviously say the same thing about the Patty Considine character also, with him being this, really used to be violent dude that, like, did prison time and all that, and is now, like, this sort of Jesus freak kind of dude. But the whole thing about there's that where he's kind of playing the underlying thing, where even though he's like in this religious territory now, we kind of sense throughout that side of it, like there's a tensity about him that's really subtle, where we can kind of feel like that side of him is not completely gone, and it's kind of just waiting to be brought out. And of course, both Tamsin and Patty Considine's character in the same scene bring out those other sides of themselves, and it's pretty much when the movie explodes and goes in the direction that it's going to end in. And so, and then this scene is when things seem to. This is more or less the reveal of Tamsin, I would think, especially with the way we see her, click on, and like when she's playing a character and when she's being sincere. Because the really interesting thing about this is, for a while throughout the movie, we think that there's something way underneath that Tamsin's trying to satisfy, mainly with like guys, because obviously throughout the whole movie she has the seemingly lesbian tendencies, but there are two particular moments when she's the first one being when she's talking to Mona about her ex-boyfriend and how this is the "do you fuck a lot" scene. So she has Mona mimic on her how they would do it. And she seems to like really, really want to know this experience of being with a dude. And then the second thing, when they go to Patty Considine's thing, and she's like observing him from a distance, like really intently. and there's this question of what exactly is she, because there's also whenever he like comes to the house and she stands at the window and just like watches him. Um, and so the thing is when she does confront him and basically tries to get that evil side to come back out of him, it's like at first we have no idea where this is going because she's like so. It seems to be coming from such a real place when she's trying to bring it out of him, especially since we've seen her. And this is unaddressed by the rest of the movie, and not in dialogue, certainly, of her kind of watching him the way that she does. So there's like such that mystery around this character, a lot of which doesn't feel all that explained, which kind of makes her even more intriguing. Um, which I think has led to some criticisms where some people think the movie itself is like ultimately pointless because we're not quite sure completely where she's coming from or why she does what she does. But in the end, I don't think that matters much, especially when you look at it as more of a performance thing than anything else. That's certainly the way Tamsin would look at it. Because you've got this thing where, obviously, I said many times before that kind of my turning point from not being a Blunt fan to being a big Blunt fan was Sicario. And while that was kind of the turning point, I saw this after that. And even though Sicario did kind of turn me around on her, I think I can easily say that her performance as Tamsin in My Summer of Love was the first time that she just absolutely, completely knocked me the fuck out. And it's one of those cases where, regardless of how you feel about the rest of the movie, once this is revealed about her, you just kind of immediately want to start the movie over again and completely watch like every single move that she makes. And then these scenes where we now know what we know, and we also know that Blunt as an actress knows this when she's performing these earlier scenes. So you have the scene when she's talking about, they're like outside supposedly where her dad is with his secretary or whoever, and just has this huge breakdown about how she feels about him doing this, and it's like so incredibly convincing. And then you have a sort of follow-up scene to that when she's talking about her sister who died of anorexia, and she goes into like great detail all the way down to how, the vomit like stained her teeth and like made them wear away from the acid and all that. And it's and the great thing about this too, it kind of comes from the writing on in the performance working together, is when you have like when she's breaking down, like the emotion is like so incredibly real. But then when she says stuff like she stopped smiling and stopped living as she's breaking down, it's like the emotion feels so incredibly real, but the words feel so premeditated, and you can like totally see the clues there. And it's like it's insane how much, because the thing also is that the fact that she does feel so real in the moment, but then we also kind of know that there's two sides to it. It still works anyway, even knowing that. Like, it does feel like you're watching an entirely different scene when you know versus when you don't. And that's the kind of thing where I'm not even sure how you pull that off. But this movie does it, and her performance certainly does also. And it's like this whole thing of like, her thing is basically like catfishing people just to their faces, and how she can pull this off. And it's, yeah, it takes a great actress to play a great actress, and that's exactly what we get here. And of course, she even says she sees it as like acting and basically like a performance thing, but we realize that this, if anything else, is just this really blatant, emotionally dangerous sociopath. But which obviously leads us to this final scene, which may feel a bit abrupt, but I guess does bring us full circle, where it's like, even though, like I said, there is a distance between Mona and Patty Considine in regards to the whole religion thing, and then especially when they're making fun of it, like in the bathtub scene, when they're like play exorcism and all that. So it's like this this exorcism of Tamsin when she almost drowns her and then just leaves her there. And yeah, like I said, I don't know if I can fully say I know exactly what this movie's doing at all times, but I think that's kind of what I like about it. Like I said, on top of all the technical aspects of it, also and how just really well shot it is, but also just kind of the simplicity of it just really does wonders for it. And I think I mean, it's clearly a conscious decision too, since it's to my I don't know much about the novel at all really, but it's to my understanding the novel that it's based on has like a whole lot of like subplots in it or something, or like side things going on that are completely cut out of this. And I do think that's a great thing because the simplicity of this movie is really what makes it, and really adds to like I'm saying the realism surrounding it too. So yeah, so I do think the movie is very good, and I do think like Natalie Press's performance and Patty Considine are all very good. But I mean, how can you not walk away from this just completely and totally calling it Blunt's movie? You can't. Like you honestly, there's no other way to put it. You just can't. So that's I think going to be it for this. So we've got one more to go, which I'm hopefully going to see the first showing Wednesday and get this out as soon as possible, which also depends on Owen's schedule, but hopefully as soon as possible. So, and then we will be done with this. So that's what we have. So until then,